Every level of Marvel supervillain teams explained. Level 1. Trash. The Enforcers. When people talk about the earliest supervillain teams in Marvel history, they don't usually mean these guys. The Enforcers were street thugs dressed like a bad wrestling trio that wandered into Spider-Man's world in the early 1960s. You had Ox, the muscle-bound brute with more strength than sense, Montana, the lasso-swinging cowboy, and Fancy Dan, a 5-foot firecracker with martial arts flair and a name straight out of a cheap nightclub poster. Together, they were supposed to represent organized muscle, New York enforcers for hire. Instead, they became the symbol of how small-time crime looked before supervillains took over the Marvel landscape. They first appeared in Amazing Spider-Man number 10 in 1964, hired by the big man to keep Spider-Man busy while real criminals handled business. Back then, they weren't meant to conquer the world or unleash cosmic weapons. They just wanted control of the city's underworld. For a while that worked. They showed up in back alley brawls, shaking down witnesses, cracking heads for mob bosses like Hammerhead, and occasionally thinking they could take on superheroes. Every time it ended the same way. Spidey knocking them out, webbing them up, and making a quick joke before swinging off to fight someone that actually mattered. Their most famous defeat came when they tried to jump Spider-Man alongside the big man's successor, Crime Master. Within minutes, half the team was unconscious, and the rest were dangling from lampposts. They became recurring filler for hero warm-ups, stand-ins that filled a few panels whenever Marvel needed to show a hero cleaning up the streets. Even Daredevil and Luke Cage crossed paths with them, often finishing the fight in less time than it took for the Enforcers to argue about who was in charge. Marvel occasionally tried to rebrand them. New members like Snake Marston, Hammer, Harrison, and even Fancy Dan with powered gauntlets were thrown into the mix. Still, nothing stuck. They outlasted dozens of other forgotten gangs simply by showing up again and again in stories that needed easy villain. Over time, they stopped being a real threat and became more of a nostalgic callback, proof of how much the superhero world had evolved from its pulp crime roots. Today, the Enforcers are relics of an age before Infinity Stones, gods, or multiverse politics. They're the warm-up act history left behind, men in hats and suspenders trying to punch their way through a world that passed them long ago. Every universe needs its small fry, and in Marvel's hierarchy of evil, they sit firmly at the bottom, loud, loyal, and forever out of their legal level 2 bad, the Serpent Society. When Marvel needed a team that looked professional but couldn't win a big fight to save their lives, they got the Serpent Society, a group of snake-themed mercenaries whose biggest accomplishment might be managing payroll. They slithered into Captain America comics mid-1980s, led by Sidewinder, who pitched the group like a business startup. His idea was simple: villains needed benefits. Instead of robbing banks solo and getting tossed in jail, they could join a union, split the profits, and get dental. It sounded clever, and for a moment, it worked. The society grew fast, recruiting killers with reptile gimmicks: Anaconda, Bushmaster, Cobra, Diamondback, Black Mamba, and Cottonmouth. Each one had unique skills: super strength, flexibility, venom sprays, or sheer intimidation. Together, they built a reputation as the go-to contract killers for corporations, dictators, and secret agencies who wanted dirty work done quietly. They represented the middle class of villainy, dangerous, organized, but ultimately out of their depth when real power hit the table. They had victories: assassinations, data theft, and the occasional kidnapping. But every time they reached too high, Captain America came crashing down like clockwork. One of their most infamous arcs saw Viper take over the team, forcing them into global terrorism. For a few months, the Serpent Society transformed from a paycheck-driven club into a fanatical cult spreading chemical weapons and chaos. It was their boldest moment, and predictably, their undoing. Viper's obsession tore them apart, leaving half the members dead or defected and the rest crawling back to small-time crime. Over the years, they kept mutating, sometimes rebranding as Serpent Solutions, a satirical take on corporate America where villains wore suits and pitched evil like a business merger. Even then, they were still getting smacked around by heroes like Captain America and the Falcon. Their problem was a lack of ambition. The Serpent Society existed to make a living, not a legacy. They always picked contracts that paid instead of plans that mattered, or mold, and Marvel used them as an ongoing punchline for villain bureaucracy. Still, they're a fascinating artifact, a reflection of the 1980s when everything, even evil, came with a business model. The Frightful Four. Now, if the Serpent Society was a company with low ambition, the Frightful Four was a team with too much of it. They were built to be the Fantastic Four's dark reflection, a simple idea that kept falling apart in execution. Created by the Wizard, a genius inventor with the charisma of a tax form, the team launched with Sandman Trapster, who fought crime with glue guns, and Medusa, who at that point was still a villain before joining the Inhumans. The plan? Destroy. The Fantastic Four prove superiority and rule the headline. The reality? Endless internal drama and spectacular collapses. They had numbers, tech, and talent, but the Frightful Four could never keep it together. Medusa. Left early, Sandman turned good, and Wizard's obsession with Reed Richards dragged the team. Through constant rebuilds, over time the lineup rotated like a revolving door. Hydra Man, Claw, even Titania stepping in for a few chaotic runs. Their high point came when they briefly captured the Fantastic Four and nearly unmasked Spider-Man on live television. Their low point was every other appearance after that, when they'd lose within a single issue. They always looked better on paper. They had brains, brawn, and gadgets, but they lacked unity. Every attempt to elevate them ended with betrayal, arrest, or implosion. They became a benchmark for villain failure, a team that could organize a perfect ambush and still lose before lunch. Yet their legacy stuck. The name Frightful Four kept returning across decades because it symbolized something Marvel loves: ambition without stability. In a universe filled with gods and geniuses, they proved that sometimes the hardest part of being a villain is keeping the team together long enough to matter. Level 3. Mid. The Hellions. When the X-Men were creating heroes, Emma Frost was creating rivals. The Hellions were her personal answer to Xavier's school for gifted youngsters, mutant teens trained under the White Queen's guidance at the Massachusetts Academy. On paper, they looked like the future of mutant power. Telepaths, flyers, energy manipulators, and bruisers with attitude. Behind the scenes, they were a collection of egos, trauma, and teenage volatility just waiting to explode. Their early lineup included Empath, who could manipulate emotions; Thunderbird, James, Proudstar, a powerhouse out to avenge his brother's death; Cat's Eye, a shapeshifter with feline instincts; and Firestar, a walking furnace who never quite fit in. They were sharper, meaner, and less idealistic than Xavier's New Mutants. Emma's experiment in control rather than compassion. The Hellions made an impact fast, showing they could rival the New Mutants in raw ability. Their early clashes felt more like rival school brawls than life-or-death battles, training exercises with mutant-sized consequences. Emma Frost was molding them into leaders for her future version of mutant society. For a while it worked. Then came the Sentinels. In Uncanny X-Men number 281, the team was ambushed by the government's robotic enforcers, and most of the original Hellions were wiped out in one night. That massacre cemented their legend, the mutant generation that never made it out of adolescence. Years later, the name Hellions returned again and again, each time reimagined for a new kind of chaos. One of the most notable revivals came during the Krakoan era, when Psylocke, Havoc, and Mr. Sinister formed a new squad under the same name. These Hellions weren't students. They were unstable mutants being used as weapons. People like Wildchild, Orphan Maker, and Nanny were given second chances through missions that tested their sanity and loyalty. Their stories turned darker, exploring trauma, identity, and redemption. Even with power on their side, they remained Marvel's most self-destructive mutant team, forever on the line between rehabilitation and relapse. Their history reads like a cautionary tale wrapped in tragedy. No other mutant team has been reborn and destroyed as many times, and no other name carries that same mix of talent and doom. They've always had potential, but potential is fragile in Marvel's world. For every victory, there's a massacre waiting around the corner. The Hellfire Club, created in Uncanny X-Men number 129, they were less of a supervillain team and more of an exclusive society where the powerful plotted in velvet chairs. Led by Sebastian Shaw, the club's inner circle gathered influential mutants and wealthy humans under the illusion of sophistication. They dressed like 18th century aristocrats, drank vintage wine, and quietly tried to dominate global politics. Their power was in information, influence, and seduction. The Hellfire Club reached legendary status through the Dark Phoenix saga, where Jason, Wingard, Mastermind, infiltrated Jean Grey's mind and manipulated her into becoming the Black Queen. That move nearly destroyed the X-Men and remains one of the most infamous acts of psychological warfare in comics. It showed exactly what made the club dangerous. They didn't need armies when they could corrupt one of the most powerful mutants alive. Over the decades, the club evolved into multiple branches, each with its own political flavor. Shaw stayed on as a manipulative businessman, while Emma Frost flipped from villain to hero and redefined her legacy within the X-Men. New figures like Donald Pierce, Selene, and Harry Leland kept the group steeped in power games and betrayal. Even in modern comics, the Hellfire Club remains relevant. During the Krakoan era, it resurfaced in new form as the Hellfire trading company managing mutant trade and politics through Emma Frost and Kate Pryde. They stand out because they never needed to evolve into a super team. It's an institution. Where other villain groups fight and fall apart, the club endures. Its real superpower is longevity, built on secrecy and corruption instead of spectacle. Whether controlling governments, funding wars, or manipulating heroes from behind silk curtains, the Hellfire Club stays right where it thrives, in the shadows, pulling strings while the world burns in luxury. Level 4. Okay, the Sinister Six. In Marvel's lineup of villain squads, few names are as instantly recognizable as the Sinister Six. The concept was pure genius, 6 of Spider-Man's greatest enemies putting aside their egos long enough to take him down. The man behind it was Dr. Octopus, who gathered Vulture, Electro, Sandman, Kraven the Hunter, and Mysterio for one coordinated strike. Their first appearance in the Amazing Spider-Man Annual #1 in 1964 set the tone. Each villain fought Spider-Man one-on-one in sequence, convinced their solo moment would seal the deal. Instead, Spider-Man outlasted them all. That early defeat became tradition. Across the decades, the Six have been reassembled countless times, each version a snapshot of Marvel's shifting era. When Ock led, the team had structure and strategy. When others tried to take over, chaos followed. The lineup rotated like a revolving door. Rhino, Shocker, Hobgoblin, and even Venom filled temporary seats. The idea always stayed the same. Unite 6. Powerhouse rogues against one hero, and the result stayed the same too. Disaster. Their strength was never their powers. It was their persistence. No matter how many humiliations they suffered, they always came back for another swing. At their best, they gave Spider-Man his toughest challenges. Storylines like Revenge of the Sinister Six and Ends of the Earth showed what happened when Ock used real planning, turning global technology into a weapon and pushing the team beyond petty crime. For once, they felt dangerous, not just determined. Yet, like most villain coalitions, they were fragile. Personal agendas, greed, and egos tore them apart faster than any superhero could. Ock's ambition clashed with Sandman's conscience, Electro's greed, and Kraven's pride. Even in the Superior Foes era, a comedic reimagining featuring Boomerang and Beetle, they were defined by dysfunction. Still, the Sinister Six hold an iconic spot in Marvel lore. They're the measuring stick for every villain alliance that came after them. Whenever a hero faces multiple enemies at once, it's compared to the Six. That legacy alone gives them staying power. They may fail spectacularly, but they fail with style. The Hand. This ancient ninja clan predates most modern heroes, tracing its roots back to feudal Japan. They began as a sect of assassins who sought immortality through dark rituals, striking deals with demonic entities to grant them resurrection powers. Their story runs through some of Marvel's most grounded characters: Daredevil, Wolverine, Elektra, and the Punisher, and every encounter feels like a collision with something older than morality. The Hand's philosophy revolves around servitude to death itself. When they kill, they don't just end lives, they harvest them. Through their mystic resurrection techniques, fallen warriors are reanimated as soldiers bound to their will. That power turned them into one of the most persistent threats in Marvel's street-level world. Cities like New York, Madripoor, and Tokyo have all fallen under their influence at one point. Their silent armies operate in shadows, guided by the Beast, a demonic force that demands loyalty through blood. The group gained major prominence in Daredevil's run by Frank Miller, where Matt Murdock's fight against corruption turned literal when the Hand tried to use Elektra as their weapon. Her resurrection became one of Marvel's most haunting stories, tying her fate permanently to the clan. Later arcs like Shadowland pushed that darkness further, when Daredevil himself became the Hand's leader, transforming from hero to conqueror before realizing the corruption eating at his soul. Beyond Daredevil, the Hand has infiltrated every corner of Marvel's underworld. They've partnered with Hydra, clashed with Wolverine during his Enemy of the State arc, and even manipulated mutant politics when it suited their purpose. Their reach is intimate. They thrive in alleys, not galaxies. For all their mysticism and menace, the Hand's strength lies in numbers and secrecy. They don't announce themselves. They appear, strike, vanish, and resurrect. You don't fight one of them, you fight all of them, again and again. They're less a team and more a plague that never stays buried. Level 5. Good. Hydra. If Marvel villains had a corporate headquarters for world domination, Hydra would own the building, the stock, and probably the government issuing the licenses. They've been around since World War II, starting as a Nazi deep science division under Baron Wolfgang von Strucker, before evolving into something much bigger, an international terrorist empire that believes chaos is the only path to order. Hydra is an ideology. Their symbol, the coiling green octopus, says it all. Cut off one head and 2 more take its place. Their reach stretches across decades and continents. They've infiltrated SHIELD, corrupted governments, and turned their scientists into nightmares with names like Arnim Zola, Madame Hydra. The group mastered long-term infiltration, turning heroes into pawns and allies into enemies before anyone realizes the strings are being pulled. During Secret Empire, they hit their most shocking milestone when Captain America himself was revealed to have been reprogrammed into a Hydra sleeper agent by the Cosmic Cube. For months, Steve Rogers ruled the United States under their banner, transforming their underground terror network into a legitimate regime. It remains one of Marvel's most controversial storylines because it felt too real. A hero of justice turned figurehead for fascism. Over the years, Hydra's presence has shifted like a virus adapting to new hosts. In some eras, they act like covert scientists funding bioweapons. In others, they're political revolutionaries, wrapped in green uniform. Their funding comes from everywhere: black markets, front, companies, and compromised institutions. Even the Avengers and SHIELD have discovered Hydra operatives within their ranks more than once. The group's success comes from patience. They don't rush invasions, they plant roots, manipulate systems, and let nations fall apart from within. Every major Marvel power structure has crossed their path. Iron Man battled their tech arms. Race Black Widow spent years cleaning up the assassins they trained. Nick Fury dedicated entire decades to uprooting them, only to discover the infestation went deeper. The organization's resurrection after every collapse has made it the closest thing Marvel has to institutionalized evil, a network that never dies, only evolves. The phrase "Hail Hydra" became one of the most chilling catchphrases in comics because it symbolized corruption that can't be killed, only delayed. They're not the flashiest villains, but they're the most believable. Dark Avengers. When Norman Osborn rose from disgrace to political power after Secret Invasion, he did what every manipulator eventually does: rebrand. As head of the newly formed HAMMER, Osborn decided the world needed his heroes. The Dark Avengers were born from that philosophy, a government-approved team of killers dressed as saviors. Each member was a reflection of a familiar face twisted into something uglier. Bullseye wore Hawkeye's mask. Moonstone became Ms. Marvel. Daken, Wolverine's son, took up his father's claws. Venom slimed his way into Spider-Man's role. Sentry served as the team's walking nuke, half-god, half-ticking time bomb. To the public, they were the Avengers reborn. In reality, they were a powder keg led by a man in a stolen Iron Patriot suit. Their mission roster read like state-sanctioned villainy. They took down rogue superhumans, raided Asgard, and enforced Osborn's New World Order under the pretense of security. For a brief moment, it worked. The media loved them, politicians backed them, and the world believed in the illusion. Behind the curtain, the team was fracturing. Sentry's psyche was unraveling, Bullseye's sadism spiraled, and Osborn's paranoia started swallowing him whole. The Empire collapsed in the siege event when Osborn led an invasion against Asgard itself. Convinced he was untouchable, the Dark Avengers fell apart in the chaos, exposed as the frauds they were. Yet for that brief window, they held the world hostage with branding alone. That's what made them dangerous. Not power, but perception. Even after their downfall, the idea lingered. The government-sponsored villain team became a recurring Marvel motif, revived in new forms with Luke Cage, Venom, and Ghost leading. Different incarnations. The Dark Avengers represented a chilling truth about Marvel's world. Sometimes evil doesn't need to hide in shadows. It just needs a logo and a press conference. Level 6. Great. The Black Order. When Thanos needed an army that didn't fail, he created one. The Black Order were his generals, each one a specialist in conquest. Their first major appearance came during Infinity, 2013, where they invaded Earth while Thanos hunted for his missing son. What made them terrifying was their precision. Corvus Glaive, Thanos' field commander, carried a blade that made him nearly immortal as long as it stayed intact. Proxima Midnight, his wife and warrior, could pierce any defense with her cosmic spear. Ebony Maw was the voice of manipulation, capable of corrupting even the purest heroes through words alone. Black Dwarf, later renamed Cull Obsidian, served as their unstoppable tank, while Supergiant specialized in mental warfare. Together, they weren't soldiers. They were a force designed to break civilizations. Their first real test was the invasion of Wakanda. While the Avengers were spread thin across the galaxy, the Black Order brought war to Earth. Ebony Maw subdued Doctor Strange, Corvus, and Proxima led siege after siege, and for a moment, the planet looked doomed. Even in defeat, they made an impression. Their strategy was flawless, their loyalty unwavering, and their presence instantly elevated Thanos from lone tyrant to warlord with an army of nightmares. Over time, the Black Order became fixtures in both comics and film, showing up in Avengers Infinity War as Thanos' children. Their cinematic portrayal leaned into the mythic, silent, calculated, and fanatically loyal. They weren't there to talk, they were there to conquer. Across storylines, the Order has shifted allegiances. After Thanos' death, they briefly served other cosmic powers like the Grandmaster, proving that loyalty in the Marvel cosmos is as flexible as survival demands. But even when scattered, their legacy remains clear. They are the standard for elite villain units, small, efficient, and ruthless. When they arrive, the war's already lost to Masters of Evil. Before any other villain alliance dared to exist, there were the Masters of Evil, the blueprint for every supervillain team that followed. Formed by Baron Heinrich Zemo in the Avengers number 6, 1964, they were designed as the direct counterpoint to Earth's mightiest heroes. Their membership included icons of destruction, Enchantress, Executioner, Melter, Radioactive Man, and later figures like Ultron, Absorbing Man, and Whirlwind. Their goal was simple: defeat the Avengers and prove villains could organize just as effectively as heroes. The difference was that their victories actually counted. Over time, the Masters evolved under Baron Helmut Zemo, Heinrich's son, who turned them into a strategic powerhouse. Their most infamous victory came in the Under Siege arc, where Zemo orchestrated a full-scale assault on Avengers Mansion. The attack was brutal, personal, and perfectly executed. They captured Captain America, injured Hercules, and left the mansion in ruins. For once, the bad guys didn't just threaten, they dominated. That storyline cemented the Masters as more than just another group of villains. They were a genuine threat to the Marvel status quo. Later versions expanded their scope. Zemo's leadership shifted the team from chaos to ideology. They weren't robbers or saboteurs anymore. They were conquerors with purpose. Some lineups grew massive, featuring nearly every major villain not in prison. Others splintered into specialized strike groups. Even when rebranded under Zemo's Thunderbolts identity, their DNA as the Masters of Evil remained, the same strategic ruthlessness under a new public face. They endure because they've succeeded where most villain teams fail. They've outsmarted gods, infiltrated governments, and inflicted real damage on the Avengers. Their power comes from structure, planning, and a willingness to go further than anyone else. If the Black Order are assassins, the Masters are tacticians, villainy organized to perfection. Apocalypse's horsemen. Few teams in Marvel carry more symbolic weight than Apocalypse's horsemen. They are chosen, instruments of evolution. The ancient mutant An-Sabah Nur, better known as Apocalypse, recruits 4 individuals to serve as war, famine, pestilence, and death, each representing a piece of his belief in survival through destruction. The lineup changes constantly, but the mission stays the same: reshape the world by wiping away the weak. Some of Marvel's most dramatic transformations have come from these recruitments. Angel, one of the original X-Men, became Archangel, the metallic-winged embodiment of death after Apocalypse rebuilt him from near death. His story defined the tragic cost of power, how even noble heroes could be remade into weapons. Over time, the Horsemen roster has included mutants, gods, and even Avengers. Each version reflects its era. Sometimes they're monstrous, other times reluctant, always apocalyptic. They've launched some of the X-Men's darkest wars, from the fall of Archangel Saga to Age of Apocalypse. Their battles are about ideology. Apocalypse wants the strong to inherit the Earth, even if that means burning it down. Their legacy endures because every generation of mutants fears them. Their arrival signals catastrophe. When they ride, something fundamental in Marvel's world shifts. Level 7. GOAT. The Cabal. In the Marvel universe, some villains dream of power while others already have it. And the Cabal was what happened when those people decided to share a table. The original version, formed after Secret Invasion 2008, when Norman Osborn rose to political power and replaced SHIELD with his own organization, HAMMER. To keep his empire stable, Osborn gathered a council of manipulators and monarchs: Doctor Doom, Loki, Emma Frost, Namor, and the Hood. Together, they were the dark mirror of the Illuminati, a collection of figures too, dangerous to oppose individually and too self-interested to ever trust each other. Osborn promised unity, but what he really built was a chessboard full of pieces that thought. They were kings. Doom sought technological dominance. Loki schemed for Asgard, and Namor saw the alliance as a shield for Atlantis. Emma Frost played politics between mutants and humans, while the Hood brought criminal networks into the fold. For a time, their cooperation worked. Osborn used the Cabal's influence to control the superhero community, justify the dark Avengers, and steer global policy under the pretense of security. They weren't fighting from the shadows anymore. They were running the show. As expected, the alliance cracked under its own weight. The egos in the room couldn't coexist for long. Doom and Osborn clashed over authority, Loki baited the others into conflict, and Namor grew disgusted by the group's hypocrisy. When Osborn's regime finally fell during Siege, the Cabal disintegrated, but its concept had already evolved. Years later, the Cabal name resurfaced under Namor's leadership during New Avengers, 2013. This time, the stakes were cosmic. Earths across the multiverse were colliding in a chain of incursions, and Namor recruited the most merciless minds to stop it. Thanos, Black Swan, Maximus, Terrax, Corvus Glaive, and Proxima Midnight. Their method was brutal. Destroy other worlds to save their own. It was survival stripped of morality. That incarnation of the Cabal became one of the most feared groups in Marvel history, committing planetary genocide in the name of necessity. When the heroes refused to act, the villains stepped up and proved that. Sometimes the only ones willing to make the hardest choices are the ones you'd never want in charge. By the time the Cabal dissolved again, its legacy was cemented. They weren't defined by victories or defeats, but by the scale of their decisions. Every member was a ruler, a manipulator, or a monster, each convinced their logic justified the ruin left behind. In Marvel's hierarchy of evil, the Cabal sits at the top because they blurred the line between villainy and pragmatism. They didn't conquer, they governed. The Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, founded by Magneto and his children, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, in X-Men number 4, 1964, the Brotherhood began as a reaction to a world that feared mutants. They sought dominance, believing that the only way to survive persecution was to rise above humanity entirely. Magneto's early Brotherhood included Toad, Mastermind, and his twin recruits, who at the time followed reluctantly. Their conflicts with Professor Xavier's X-Men defined an era, the ideological war between fear and tolerance. For Magneto, humanity's hatred of mutants was proof that coexistence was impossible. Every battle with the X-Men wasn't just a fight, it was a debate written in fire and metal. After Magneto's initial downfall, the Brotherhood reshaped itself under Mystique, who turned it from a crusade into an infiltration network. Her version included Destiny, Blob, Pyro, and Avalanche, operating under the guise of terrorism but often serving deeper agendas. Mystique's Brotherhood attacked the U.S. Senate, assassinated anti-mutant politicians, and became the public face of mutant extremism during the 1980s. For years, they were the bogeymen that justified anti-mutant laws and sentinels. Yet in true Marvel fashion, their motives were more complex than simple hatred. They were fighting a system that was already hunting them. Over time, the Brotherhood evolved into multiple offshoots. The Freedom Force, a government-sponsored rebrand, the Mutant Liberation Front, and the Brotherhood of Mutants, from alternate timelines like Days of Future Past. Even during the Krakoan era, their ideology lingers. Mutants who believe freedom can't exist without force still echo Magneto's creed. The Brotherhood's significance is impossible to overstate. They were the first villains in Marvel to fight for a cause that was survival. Their actions shaped mutant politics for decades and forced the X-Men to define what they stood for. In many ways, they created the modern mutant identity, one born from struggle, rebellion, and the refusal to kneel. Every great villain team in Marvel's history took something from them: organization, purpose, or defiance. The Brotherhood of Evil Mutants remains the gold standard of ideological villainy, where every fight carries weight and every defeat still moves the world forward. And that's it. Now to you, if every one of these teams went to war at the same time, who do you think would walk out alive? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more amazing videos like this one.